Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having a conversation with Franco Terrazzano. He is the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Franco, a lot of the big ticket items in this budget were pre-announced by Prime Minister Trudeau, mostly strangely, maybe not so strangely when you look at the politics, but in the provincial fields of jurisdiction. I'm thinking housing, I'm thinking school lunches of all things. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it seems like the federal government is forgetting about the Constitution here and how we have a division of powers, right? And this is far from the first time where you see the federal government stepping on provincial toes, right? There was the unconstitutional Bill C-69 that impacted natural resource development all across Canada. Of course, you see the federal government picking fights with the provinces because provincial premiers are standing up for their taxpayers against the carbon tax. So it seems like the federal government is trying to spend more money on everything forever and forgetting that there is a constitutional division of powers here in Canada.
Yeah, I understand the politics of it. Who's going to stand up in the House of Commons say they're against school lunches for kids, but they have no ability to actually implement anything like that. They have to have an agreement with every province, and somehow I suspect that there'll be more bureaucracy involved with this than would be usually acceptable. Is that your fear as well?
Well, with a lot of these different national programs, not only do they come with this huge price tag, but when you get this like federal mindset where they can impose different programs on different provinces, you end up with a one size fits none type of government program, right? And here's another problem. Like, it's one thing to announce new spending, but you have to find savings somewhere else in the budget, right? You can't just spend more money on everything forever. That's not a good way to run a family's household budget. It's not a good way to run a small business's budget. And it's certainly not a way to run the finances of a nation.
That's a good point. Was there anything in the budget about constraint in spending anywhere?
I wish. We have heard the finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, say that the federal government would find $15 billion in savings over 5 years. But if you just look at the numbers, they're increasing spending by $37 billion this year alone.
Right.
So, a little pro tip for the finance minister, when you increase spending by more than $30 billion in 1 year, you're saving money wrong.
Yeah, no, good point. I got to go back to this issue of the size of the federal public service, too, because when I was president of the Treasury Board, it seems like a long time ago, but it's about 8 years ago now. Since then, the size of the federal public service, i.e. under Justin Trudeau, has increased by over 100,000 positions. It's outstripped the private sector in terms of its growth. And I'd love to get your commentary on if this is sustainable and a wise course of action.
Well, it's absolutely not. It's absolutely not. Like you mentioned, they've added like 100,000 bureaucrats in less than 10 years. It's an increase of like 40%. And like you ask any Canadian on the street outside of Ottawa if their government services have improved by 40%, and they'd probably laugh at you because we're not getting better services for the amount of money that we're paying for the bureaucracy, right? And it's not just the number of government employees. The federal government has also dished out more than $1 billion in bonuses going back to 2015, even when government departments are failing to consistently meet half of their own performance targets. You layer on top of that 800,000 pay raises given out in Ottawa during the pandemic years. And no wonder you get to a point where more than half of the government's day-to-day spending is now being consumed by the federal bureaucracy.
And again, just to underline this point for people, when you see job numbers go up, like there's more jobs in Canada, you may think, well, things are going well here. But if the great proportion of those jobs are actually in the public sector, whereas the private sector job growth is flat, that's actually another thing that makes this unsustainable and probably not a good thing for the economy generally.
I totally agree with that, right? Because at the end of the day, who pays the bills? Well, it's taxpayers, but more to the point, it's taxpayers who are in the private sector who are not in government, right? We need a very strong and healthy private sector, a very robust private sector to pay all the bills around here. right? So when you continue to add more of a burden within government and a government continues to grow and grow and grow, of course it's becoming a drag on the private sector because relatively speaking, the government is increasing faster than what is going on in the business community. And of course that's not sustainable.
We're having a conversation with Franco Terrazzano. He is Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. We're going to take another brief break. We'll be back with our guest after these messages.